It is 12:01. Welcome, everyone. I'm Stan Caldwell, the Executive Director of the Traffic21 Institute and our Mobility21 University Transportation Center at Carnegie Mellon University. Lisa Kay, are we ready to go?
Yes, we are.
Great. Well, I want to thank Lisa Kay and Joy Mann for all of their efforts in setting up this webinar. We're very excited to move forward with this. Our motivation behind this webinar is, is really looking at this issue of, how transportation managers are dealing with the disruptive technology of artificial intelligence. And CMU has been on the cutting edge of research in artificial intelligence for many years. And a lot of our research from our transportation institutes have been focusing on this and actually deploying a lot of this since we started with Traffic21 back in 2010. And these have been deployments in the field with our partners. We have a deployment partner consortium of 165 organizations that work with our researchers to deploy and test and evaluate these, this type of research in the field. And AI is not just automated vehicles, but a lot of other applications for the infrastructure and for operation of transportation systems. And we've gotten a lot of feedback of, the value of this technology, but also there's been a lot of, concerns about the risks related to this as well. And so our University Transportation Center, Mobility21, funded by U.S. Department of Transportation, funds our research, but they also fund our education initiatives. And so we, of course, are focusing on educating the master's and Ph.D. students that are, developing and deploying a lot of this in industry. But, we also focus on, other members in the workforce with our partners, such as the Community College of Allegheny County, and then even into younger grades with groups like the Rural Robotics Initiative, looking at how we prepare the workforce for this. But we saw a major void out there, and we were hearing from our partners, both in the public and private sector, a major void in, in professionals who are already out there in the workforce managing systems, whether they're managing them from, from a state or local agency, or whether they're consultants or others in the field trying to manage, artificial intelligence in transportation. And so our motivation around this webinar and an executive education course we put together was try to get this information out and have an official executive education program in order to, to really help the existing workforce deal with issues that are coming up right now and opportunities from artificial intelligence in the world of transportation. So I'd like to thank the Heinz College and David and Emily in particular in the executive education program for helping us, put together this webinar and also this kind of week-long boot camp certificate program that we're going to talk about afterwards. So I'll give a little, 3-minute update of that at the end of this session. So please stick around for that as well. But today we're very fortunate to have 3 guests with us. One is Mark Copko, who's the Director of the Office of Transformational Technology for Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, and the Secretary of Transportation, the previous Secretary, Leslie Richards, developed this position, Mark's position, just to deal with a lot of these new disruptive technologies. So we're very fortunate to have him here, and Secretary Gramian is continuing this focus on, really utilizing new technology in transportation. We also have Summer Fowler, who's the Chief Information Officer at Argo AI, which is one of the autonomous vehicle firms right here in Pittsburgh, doing a lot of this work. And she's also going to be an instructor in this course coming up. Another instructor in this course is AlanteWhitmore, who is a Ph.D. student here in the College of Engineering and has been doing a lot of work with the city of Pittsburgh and community organizations, looking at a lot of issues around, AI in transportation and particularly issues around equity. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear a little bit from each of them on their experiences and then we're going to open it up for some questions and discussion. So if you do have questions, as we go through some of these presentations, please put them in the chat, and then we'll try to address that in the discussions afterwards. So I believe we were going to begin with a poll question to start things off. Lisa Kay, can we, you'll see that pop up on your screen. Please rate your familiarity with AI, artificial intelligence in transportation. And get the results in. Looks like everyone's kind of in the middle, which is good. And all right. So good. Everyone feels that they're kind of know a little bit about it, and and hopefully, and I think that's where a lot of us are. But hopefully today this will help answer some of your questions and maybe pose a few more as well. So we'd like to start first with Mark Kopko to give some of his experiences in dealing with AI in transportation, and particularly from the working with Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. So thank you very much for taking the time today to be with us, Mark.
Sure, happy to be here. Just want to do a quick sound check. You can hear me okay, Stan?
Yes, you're fine. Perfect.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, I guess, depending on where you are here in the country. As Stan mentioned, my name is Mark Kopko. I am the Director of PennDOT's Office of Transformational Technology. So the big thing that we do is looking more towards emerging technology, things that are 5, 10, 15 years down the road, trying to make sure the department's positioned in such a way that we can appropriately react to this technology. It seems like nowadays you always get those questions of what keeps you up at night. And when I get those questions, artificial intelligence is definitely one of those answers I have related to my job. As Stan mentioned, and as is in actual webinar description, AI has the potential to impact all facets of transportation. And I'm sure to some people that might sound overblown a little bit, but then once you actually start to dive down into it, you realize just how true it is and how scary that can potentially be. From a variety of aspects, even just how we do our day-to-day operations. Everything we do from a DOT standpoint, or even just frankly an infrastructure owner operator, is based around the human element, the human factor, and frankly the human error. So once you start to tie in artificial intelligence and then corresponding automation, this starts to take away some of those factors that we did, which are great things, but that also completely redo everything that we basically, how we design a road, how we operate our roads, and how we plan for our facilities as well. So from everything from the AASHTO Green Book to the MUTCD for how we do signage and pavement markings and a variety of other factors. So this technology, as it starts to become more ingrained and more mainstream and more integrated, we can start to see that these aren't necessarily going to be potentially incremental changes, but we could have some significant changes from a DOT infrastructure owner or operator standpoint, which can cause some disruptions basically in our system. So with that, just trying to stay abreast, there's a lot of challenges we have when we start looking towards automation and artificial intelligence. One of which it's new to a DOT. It's not necessarily new as a topic, but it's just new for a lot of DOTs actually working towards integrating that. So just having that knowledge set and that, frankly, that skill set is something that we struggle with, and trying to make sure that our staff and our support staff also have that skill set, has that knowledge, and has that understanding, so we can start to integrate things in. Also, just having the resources in place is always a challenge. Not only the personnel, but any type of additional equipment or computations that we need to make. We don't always necessarily have that. Also, from a DOT standpoint, procurement always is a little bit trickier on the public sector side versus the private sector side. And there's a risk associated with artificial intelligence. And the big thing is what happens when something goes wrong. So what happens when you approve something to operate or to function, and it's relying on artificial intelligence and something goes wrong, or frankly, what you integrate artificial intelligence into your actual operations and it does something wrong. So there's always that risk of, okay, when I start to move something more towards computer learning, computer knowledge, away from the human element, what does that open us up for? So there's definitely some challenges that we try to work through, but we also recognize that there's these potential benefits with this. There's great stuff that's coming from the external side, especially with emerging technology. Automated vehicles, as Stan mentioned, we have a new legislation in Pennsylvania allow for personal delivery devices, so more of slow-moving autonomous devices for parcel deliveries. That's another aspect that ties into this. Also, unmanned aircraft systems. So looking at these and new emerging technologies that we have, understanding that they pose great challenges, but they also offer these great rewards. We have this ability that if we can find a way for this technology and for AI to function properly within our transportation systems, we can dramatically improve efficiencies, improve mobility, address some social and economic discrepancies, and frankly, just address safety as a whole. As I mentioned before, everything we do is based around the human error and the human factor. And frankly, if we could just remove so much of that in our transportation network, it just makes it so much easier for us to try and hit our goals of zero fatalities, our reduction in crashes, or improvement in efficiencies, the reduction in congestion on our roadway networks. So a variety of things with that. So one of our challenges then is working with these technology providers and just having that understanding of, what goes into the systems, but at the same time, knowing that we don't necessarily have that expertise to really dive down in, nor for a lot of these organizations and a lot of these industries, do they want to reveal what's under the hood or behind the curtain, or however you want to phrase it, just because this is a competitive environment, it's proprietary systems. So just trying to walk that fine line is always a challenge. But one of the best things that we found to try and address and how to manage this is just communications and coordinations with these industries just goes a long way. Having these conversations, trying to get on the same page. A lot of times when we start to look at AI and say from a DOT standpoint, it's two different paths that are now starting to merge. So there's benefits there for the folks that are on the AI side. A lot of times they don't necessarily have that full grasp also on the transportation side, and vice versa. So it's a great opportunity for that knowledge share and the ability to have an understanding of what the other side is trying to work towards and how does that fit within your actual network and what your actual operational goals are. And one of the other things that I really wanted to stress too is looking at artificial intelligence is not just necessarily the types of devices and technology that's going to be on our roadways and on our facilities and how we're going to manage and operate that, but we're also looking at how we're integrating artificial intelligence into what we actually do as a department. So DOTs, just like a lot of industries, everything's moving to being data-driven decisions, no different. Now, one of the things we always say about DOTs is that we're very much data-rich, but we're very much information poor. And this is a thing that we struggle with. Traditionally, DOTs, myself included, we're an organization of engineers. We're not data scientists. We're not necessarily people who are used to, at this point in time, going down into big data sets and looking into artificial intelligence and a variety of factors with that. So our goal is to try and figure out, okay, how do we take this data that we have then and then parse from it and go through it and find what is the actual information that we have. So how do we start to identify trends or correlations that we just don't necessarily see from the surface? And that's where we look at AI as an actual solution to do this. And we're starting to do this right now within the DOT on a variety of things. So one of which is looking towards predictive modeling. The DOT is doing some good work here right now on even looking at things like inclement weather or snow squalls or whiteout conditions, just parsing through these data sets that we have, identifying, okay, here are the factors, putting then the AI behind that so that it can look at all the conditions in real time and start to identify when there's potential factors that could create something like a whiteout condition, or when's there potential factors that we start to have queuing or other things like that that could lead to secondary crashes that are far more deadly than the initial type of crashes that might have started something like a queue. So looking at this and tying this into our operations and predictive modeling, we can start to find some real artificial, we can start to find some operational efficiencies there. And one of the best things then, if you start to tie that to automation on top of that, then we also get some benefits. we have limited staff and we have limited resources and we have limited eyes and hands and able to do things and as quick as possible. But when we start to tie in artificial intelligence, we're starting to see from our automation or from our operation side that we can get these efficiencies where we're able to get messages out that much faster, signs lit up to warning drivers, messages that go out through various data feeds to other third-party providers, just because we have AI in the background helping us to keep a better situational understanding, situational awareness of our actual roadway network. So there's definitely great benefits for this, but we also recognize there's those challenges. So it's this balancing act that we're dealing with of how do we make sure that we have the knowledge and skill sets where it makes sense and applicable to a DOT. We are by means never going to be the folks that are going to be creating these systems, but we need to know how they operate and we need to know what to expect from it so we can know when it's working, we can know when it's, something's wrong, and also how to operate in between those two scenarios. So that's giving a quick overview of from a DOT's perspective. So happy to answer any questions that may be pointed towards me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark. I didn't appreciate as much the dual issue with that of how you're dealing with AI internally for applications, and then also how you're managing others from the outside world applying AI on a third party to the DOT system. So I do appreciate now the idea that you got to manage both ways. So if you have any questions for Mark, please put them in the chat. We're going to take questions at the end of ours. Next up is Summer Fowler. Summer, can you share your screen? Do you have some slides?
I will, yes, I am going to share here. And so there will be slides for this. I saw a question about that. It's very brief, but I did want to go through a couple of different things. Thanks for the great introduction, Mark. It's nice to hear from you as well. I am Summer Fowler. I used to work at Carnegie Mellon University. In fact, I worked in the CERT program there for 11 years before I went back to private industry working at Argo AI. Argo is located in the Strip District of Pittsburgh. For those of you not in the region, it's right along the Allegheny River. And as you can see here, we are on a mission to build transportation that everyone can trust. We want, one of the biggest factors that we have and challenges is really not even the technology itself, even though that is really difficult. The even bigger challenge is gaining public confidence. And so we really take to heart the fact that this must be safe technology, and it must also be technology that works with all the components that Mark was discussing. So a couple of things. We are a global company now. The first investment that Argo received was $1 billion with a B from Ford. And last summer in 2020, Volkswagen joined Ford and gave us another $1 billion. And at that time, we also took over a company. So we acquired a company that had been a subsidiary of Volkswagen. And we now have an office in Munich, and we are beginning driving operations in Germany this year. So it's been really exciting. Why did the founders decide on Pittsburgh? Brian Selesky and Pete Rander both have ties to Pittsburgh. Brian worked at Carnegie Mellon. He went to the University of Pittsburgh, as did I. He graduated there, but he worked at Carnegie Mellon and was part of the DARPA Urban Grand Challenge when Carnegie Mellon won that. Pete received his Ph.D. from Carnegie Mellon in robotics. So strong ties to the Pittsburgh region, even though they're both from the Michigan area. And they really value the fact that there's a diverse talent pool here, and that it's also, frankly, pretty difficult to navigate Pittsburgh by car. And so the challenging road operations actually give us a tremendous opportunity here. We are operating in cities around the US. So quickly I'll name them. So Pittsburgh, Dearborn, Michigan, Palo Alto, California, Miami, Florida, Washington, DC, and Austin, Texas. We also have a LiDAR company that we purchased, and I'll tell you a little more about that later, in New Jersey. I started in the company the end of 2018, and we had about 275 employees, and today we're sitting at over 1,200. So it's been tremendous growth over the past few years. As I mentioned, we have had a lot of rapid progress You may see our vehicles along with some of others in the space, with Aurora, who took over Uber ATG, and other companies that are in the area, but we're the white Ford vehicles that are driving around that have what we call the tiara on top of the car, which is the LiDAR. We drive in Lawrenceville, in the Strip, in downtown, and the North Shore. So hopefully you've seen our cars. If you haven't, or if you're in another city, hopefully you'll get to see more of them soon. As you can see, we are targeting to go driverless. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as well. And we're expanding the cities in which we operate. That is key to us. Diversity of test environments is really important, not only because of weather, because of different types of streets, but quite frankly, people drive differently in different cities. If you're from Pittsburgh, you may be familiar with the Pittsburgh left. There's also a Michigan left. They're different things. So there are ambiguous behaviors that we are capturing and that are dependent, because we want our vehicles. We are not a company that's saying no one should ever drive in the future. In fact, most of us who work at Argo love driving in some sense or another, but we want the option for transportation to be available more widely. And I enjoy driving when it's not for a boring commute, but if I could have a car drive me to my office, I would really love that. So we're really looking at working in as many different environments as we can. And so that's part of our expansion and part of our strategy. So I talked a little bit about the technology. I alluded to it, and this is what you're really here for, because you want to hear about AI and what that is in the transportation industry when it comes to these cars. We are looking to become an L4 autonomous system, and my next slide explains exactly what that means. But when you look across this, we have perception, we have extensive testing, we have machine learning as that component of AI, and then you can also see here naturalistic driving. So there's motion planning and there's control of the actual vehicle. It does take some pretty extensive custom hardware right now to do this. So if you're asking, when Argo says they're going driverless, can I buy a car? That's not our approach at first. Our approach will be working with fleets of vehicles that are available for similar to hailing a taxi cab, but you would hail a driverless vehicle. And so we're driving down the cost model with that and making things available for that. Maybe someday in the future, there will be consumer models that can be, B2C. But right now we're really looking B2B. The sensors are designed again for this level 4, and I'll show you on the next slide that exact definition. The LiDAR, one of the limitations that we've seen as we're building out our perception and our detection capabilities and the real heart of the vehicle AI components is that the LiDAR technology was not advanced enough, meaning the LiDAR could not see far enough away. And therefore, we had to operate at very low speeds, or not highway speeds, I should say. And we bought a company in 2017 that had LiDAR technology, and it's advanced, and we are able now to begin moving towards highway speed in a much more safe manner than would have been possible before, because the LiDAR can detect and see things farther away. And you can see that there are lots of tools in here. The mapping capability, and that's key to the L4 level, all the developer tools in our testing infrastructure. I will encourage you, if you're going to take the week-long boot camp and you're interested in more about this, the Argo AI website has a lot of details on our testing strategy, which is really exciting. You'll note right now, we say we're going driverless. We actually have 2 drivers. We call them drivers, right seat and left seat, in every car right now. So we have someone who his or her hands are hovering above the wheel, ready to take over at any moment if the car should need to kick into manual mode. And then there's someone in the passenger seat who is actually looking at a laptop that is seeing what the car sees and noting the environment. So if there are any anomalies, it can be noted. We can give that back to the team. They're also there as a safety check for the driver, just to make sure that everyone is paying attention. So I mentioned L4, and that's really key. It's really important to think about. When we talk about self-driving, everyone really has a different definition of what self-driving is. We are striving for level 4 autonomy. So what does that mean? You can see the levels here. This is defined by SAE, so the Society of Automotive Engineers. L5 really doesn't even have a strong definition. I don't know if we'll see L5 in my lifetime. I highly doubt that. L5 means that you can get into a vehicle and it will take you anywhere without having anything mapped, and it will never, ever, ever need a human intervention. L4 is saying that the driver does not need to be a human in the car, but there may be instances in which a human needs to take over. So there's a defined operating domain. Right now, that domain is defined by the maps that we have, the understanding that the cars that we have aren't able to just get on any road, plopped anywhere and drive. What we're really looking at is high density maps that are really looking and high definition, looking at a particular area. So we are geo-located. And we get a lot of questions like, wow, that seems really limiting. Railroads had the same thing, right? I mean, they're geo-limited to their tracks. So we don't look at it as a limitation. We look at it as a real benefit that we have all of that information. There will be instances that we can imagine when someone may need to intervene, remote operations. That does not mean that a human being with some sort of controller is actually driving the car from another location. That means that a human being in another location may be sending commands to a car that the car will then interpret to see if they are safe or not. I think that's another misunderstanding. So we're not asking that someone can remotely do something and think about all anything that could go wrong with that. The car will still be able to make localized decisions for what is safe. But that's what we're striving for, is that L4 level. If you ever have any questions, and we'll talk more about that as we go through the boot camp. This is the heart of the autonomy stack and where the AI really comes into play. What are the things we're talking about? Detection, and you can see this. So as the car is moving, it's detecting things that are around it. There's tracking and perception, right? So tracking objects over time and understanding where they are and where there may be some obfuscations and what we need to determine that may or may not be behind something that may be obfuscating something that's moving. Prediction, which is also then, if we detect something and we're tracking it, what is it going to do next? And thinking about all of the possibilities. If you're walking down the street and you turn your head to the left, there is a high probability you're going to turn left before you would turn right. However, that's not always the case. So there are tiny little things that we're looking at as we work on prediction. So this is the real heavy AI algorithms. And then there's motion planning and controls, of course. So this is actually how do we actuate the vehicle. So as we move from the system that we have and telling the car itself what to do, more gas, or if it's electrical, more power, back off, brake, turning the wheel. And there's the handoff there and how you do motion planning based on the detection, the tracking, and the prediction. We have very specialized teams of engineers that are working in each of these areas, and each of these areas are actually specialized in and of themselves. So there's a lot that goes deep there. This is how it all really fits together, and in the boot camp we'll really talk through it. But essentially you have sensors on the car, which include the LiDAR, and we have an Argo LiDAR that I'll show you next, radars, cameras, all kinds of far field, near field cameras, different types of GPS and speed. I often get that question of, well, how is the car going to know where to go if there isn't GPS? I'm frustrated when I'm on Google Maps and I lose connection. We have that mapping. We're not dependent on any one thing. It's a very resilient system in place. And then those things that I was discussing before, the compute power that's looking at perception, prediction, and tracking, the maps that are loaded onto this, the route planning. And there's a lot of tooling underneath of that. And then eventually it goes to the actuation. And that's a picture of one of our older model of Ford vehicles with the little tiara on the top that you may see driving around cities near you. So I mentioned the Argo LiDAR, and you can see there's just a difference. And so this has been, the color coding is part of the intensity. But you can see some former LiDARs that were being used and the quality that we were getting at certain depths and levels. And all of that, of course, is at the secret level for our company. But you can see the Argo LiDAR and the improvements that are being made. Again, LiDAR is only one piece. If I go back, it's only one piece of that sensor suite. It's a really critical piece, but we have a lot in play as part of the backup. And when we think about artificial intelligence, you think about intelligence itself. We have 5 senses, and we do a lot with those, we as humans, more with that, right? We do a lot. And so we're really making sure that the vehicles themselves also have more than one sense, and they have all of these sensors to back up to. I'm looking forward to discussing more. I'm very passionate about not only what Argo is doing, but just the whole future of mobility in general. We look at this as such a tremendous opportunity, not only just for moving people around, but also moving goods to people who are in need. When you think about the fact that there are cities that are food deserts, parts of them that are food deserts, where you have entire swaths of people who don't have access to healthy foods. When you think about someone who has that last mile that they need to be able to reach their job, or it's the difference in level of education and not, we're really passionate about this and the things that we can do, not only just to change, transportation itself, but really to change lives in a positive manner. So looking forward to working with all the rest of the faculty. I hope that several of you are a part of the program. And I thank you for listening to the short blurb that I have here about Argo. Thank you.
All right, Summer, thank you very much. I already see a couple of questions in the chat that we will bring up after we hear from Allanté, but thank you very much, Summer. So next up is AlanteWhitmore, who is going to talk. She is from CMU, from the College of Engineering. And again, she is going to be an instructor in the course as well. And she's going to talk about some of her experience from more of the equity side in working with municipalities on some AI issues.
Thanks, Dan. And I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation today. I think Mark and Summer made some really great points that tie perfectly into the equity conversation. Just to give you a little bit about myself, I am currently earning a joint Ph.D. in civil engineering and engineering and public policy here at Carnegie Mellon. I'm a 4th-year Ph.D. candidate, and I'm also Mobility21 fellow. So I've been working with Stan and Lisa Kay for a couple of years now, and it's been a really gratifying experience. So when we start to think about and talk about equity as it relates to autonomous vehicles and AI, I think that we have a really great opportunity now with transportation specifically to address so many different issues in transportation, from kind of the historical inequities that have been in place, as well as environmental implications, and to really revolutionize transportation, which I think has been such a core part of our development as a country and as how we get around and a part of our lives. So I think it's a really exciting time to be in transportation. And when we start to think about specifically equity, there are so many different areas in which some of the technology can absolutely amplify negative or positive externalities, from even crashing. We think about safety rather. Who is going to be impacted by the introduction of this technology? Who's going to have who will experience the most safety or the least safety, depending on how the technology is deployed in the US and worldwide as well. Also, when we think about congestion and even carbon emissions and the improvement and mitigation of like the transportation environmental impacts, where exactly are these benefits being distributed? And that's really where my work looks at, is what are the economic, the equity, and environmental impacts of shared autonomous mobility. There are also some positive impacts, right? So if we have potential impacts, if there's an increase in VMT from this technology, again, who is going to be impacted by that increase? Where is the distribution of those negative and positive impacts? And even when we think about rideshare, first and last mile service, where transportation service is going, we really want to think about, again, who exactly is going to be impacted by it. So like I was saying, a lot of my work looks at autonomous vehicles, specifically integrating them into public transportation. And there are a lot of opportunities for lower costs for pooled services. There are also a lot of demonstrations that have taken place with autonomous shuttles globally and even in the US. And so I'm really excited to be talking about how some of the case studies that have happened in the United States during the boot camp this summer. So when we talk about transportation managers specifically, I think that agencies and managers really have an opportunity. They've always been responsible for providing mobility services, and they are also mandated to consider transit access and equity in their planning. However, there are some uncertainty when we talk about deploying autonomous vehicles, shared autonomous vehicles, this new technology into transportation spaces or into our infrastructure. And public transit specifically does uniquely serve the transit dependent population. So our, not our choice travelers, but those who are absolutely relying on it, maybe because they don't own a vehicle, they're physically unable to drive for whatever reason, be it age, physical ability. And we have a mandate for public transportation systems to analyze and ensure that equity is taking place in the system. But as new and emerging businesses are coming out, like mobility as a service type of companies and structures, individuals in those spaces may not already have the tools in place to do that type of analysis and or thinking about analysis, especially under the uncertainty of this new technology. And so that's where some of the work that I've been doing can help for new businesses, for existing transit services. And I specifically look at like transit coverage and transit equity and how those two can be improved through autonomous vehicles. But we also recognize that the services that transit that are available are not one size fits all, which is why we really want to make sure that we have multiple cities that we've looked at, looking at, like I think Summer mentioned the fact that they're in Austin and Pittsburgh and Dearborn and these different places that have different topography and also different types of drivers, different speeds, etc. And I think that's going to be true for every city, from rural areas to more urban areas. There's going to be a different solution that works for those cities. And so I'm actually currently doing a multi-city study analysis of what does it look like for a small system that has like 10 to 15 stops to something as large as an LA or New York City. What does it look like for these different types of systems to have integrated shared autonomous mobility systems in there, or integrated with their public transportation? And what parameters will really impact suitability? So as transit managers are deciding how they want to integrate or work with different businesses that offer this service, or they decide to invest in a fleet on their own, having an understanding of what types of parameters are really important for decision making and being able to make an informed decision about their autonomous vehicle or autonomous mobility solutions. And the second kind of work that I've been looking at is specifically like how can autonomous vehicles, how can autonomous mobility really help to mitigate the CO2 emissions? I feel like this is relatively common knowledge. The transportation sector is the second largest producer of CO2 emissions in the US. And a lot of those emissions are from air travel. And so I've been looking at, we're starting to look at how air travel emissions can be mitigated with autonomous vehicles for regional travel. So I don't know how much that will work into the boot camp. However, when we think about different types of travelers, that includes flight, right? And there are individuals who may not be able to afford flights that can now travel more easily in the future because there'll be a lower cost option with autonomous vehicles. And so Some of the things that I'm hoping to bring to the boot camp, and I'm excited to talk about again, are tools and case studies that transit managers can look to for developing an autonomous or share autonomous mobility solutions in their cities. Also, some information about how equity plays into all these different facets, from the distribution of the technology and these different kind of factors as far as in the environment, cost efficiency, our actual physical infrastructure, and also equity. And I don't think I have, that's the last of my points, but I'm really looking forward to it. I'll be working with Aaron Steinfeld. So he's a really major thought leader in access, specifically for those who are physically differently abled physically. And so we'll be discussing a lot of the ADA thoughts and then the equity analysis for the bootcamp.
Thank you very much, Allanté. That was a great overview. So let's just jump into a lot of questions. The chat is starting to buzz with questions, and we'll start with you since you just finished up, Allanté. There's a question on from Pat Clark on human-centered design is a growing trend in his field of practice. At what point is the AI design process making its algorithms available for review and input by members of the public or public regulatory bodies? And I'm sure that may be, this may be, both Summer and Mark may be able to join in. But so questioning when, can the public be involved in the design of these algorithms and reviewing them particularly for equity and other issues?
I don't mind in bringing in a bit of my opinion, or thoughts, but I definitely think this is something for Summer and Mark as well. I absolutely think that there should be input from the public. Another piece of my work that's not really a part of this is the ethics of autonomous vehicle research and what engineers are doing. And we have a responsibility to build things, whatever field we're in, our responsibility to the public and building things that the public needs. And so I think that there needs to be a point in which the public or someone else within the public space can make a contribution. And I think it's a good guess to think that is happening in some ways, but I think there's opportunities for more.
And Summer, I know that this is a major issue with the companies and the intellectual property. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so when you think about the fact of intellectual property and what is really going to be different, that's always a consideration. So as we think about moving forward and where we're going, we know that we're not going to be able to solve every challenge. I don't know if folks are already familiar that there is something that we have released publicly called Argoverse, but it's sets of data that we have released and made available to the public for other companies to use. Now, when it comes to the AI that we put into it, or the software development that we're doing, that's where our secret sauce comes in. But some of these things that we're doing, we know it's going to take us in partnership, or we know that we can't solve that part of the challenge. So we are releasing some of the data that we have that we know will help in other spaces.
Thank you very much. And Mark, I know that in the very early days of the Pennsylvania Autonomous Vehicle Policy Task Force, this was an issue front and center and continues to be. How are you guys dealing with it from the state?
Yeah, so as much as we want to try and open this up to public comment whenever possible and public input, it's always that fine line we have to walk to. Ultimately transparency, we think, is going to be the success of this technology. As much that we can do from both the public sector side and also from the industry side to make things clear, to take out any of the ambiguities or uncertainties or assumptions associated with this technology, to try and get to the heart of it. The times where we can try and just have engagement. We see this right now. We ask questions with our AV testers on on where they're trying to do from an education standpoint. We have that as part of our personal delivery device policies as well, of just having that communications back and forth can start to have a level of at least familiarity or expectation with this technology, which will help to go a long way. And that then starts to build that conversation. Maybe that's where you then start to build off of, and you can start to get more direct input and have conversations about, okay, how are we gonna directly try and address some community-driven needs that have been identified. But the first step is to have that open communications between communities, between appropriate stakeholders, and whenever possible, try to emphasize transparency. We've been doing that from the start in Pennsylvania, encouraging, even though, you can request things to be proprietary and trade secrets under our right to know request, we strongly encourage our testers to just only give us stuff that they're willing to share, because we think it's, if that's the stuff that we are basing our decisions on whether to grant authorization, that's probably stuff that the general public would also very much be interested in and have that understanding. So transparency is key.
Great, thank you, Mark. I see a question from Ray Bettler to Summer. Is Argo looking at complete network optimization, including integration with passenger and freight, with bus, truck, air, and other forms of transportation? And again, to some of Allanté's points, how does this include emissions and cost and again, from a whole network standpoint, and it also brings in Allanté's issues of things like aviation. But we'll let Summer maybe address that first. Are you looking at integrating with other modes of transportation?
So I can't say that it is the primary focus right now, but what it is we are ensuring that we are designing in the options for that type of integration. The challenge of just making the car drive itself is a tough one. But we do have teams of people that are in the public policy space, that are in our community outreach space, working with other organizations, even just working with local police, local fire, and some of the other smart city capabilities. So we are making sure that as we build our capability, we're not designing out the option for that type of integration. So it's sort of an unsatisfactory answer, but I do want to assure you that we are wholly focused on making these cars themselves safe, also understanding that it's going to be operating in this larger network. But right now, we are not at the stage where we are solving the challenge of, okay, can I go on to, for example, an app and figure out how to get from point A to point B, and everything is connected, saying you're going to get on a train, then you're going to get into an Argo vehicle, then you're going to get onto a bicycle. That's not something that we're solving right now, although we recognize that is a network that we think is important and we want to be a part of. I did also see the question about using public transportation. We agree wholly that we want to encourage public transportation. We want to, in cases where people can share rides and do that sharing safely, that's something that we're looking at. And that brings a whole host of new questions, especially when you think about a pandemic, especially when you think about just human safety, being, if you think about, do you want your children, even as they're young adults, in a vehicle with another person? But yes, we view that we want to be a part of the transportation network, so that if there is an instance where public transportation doesn't get someone far enough, there is something else available to get someone to that job, to that family member, to that educational center.
Thank you. I also saw a question in there about the connection with connected vehicle technology, such as that on traffic signals using CV2X or DSRC. Are you guys, is Argo looking at that now?
We are. We do have, we actually, that is something that, as we talk about the connectedness, that is something we are actively working, because in order for our vehicles to work, they do have to have that V2X component, working, as I said, with the various components of the smart city or a smarter city, working with how emergency vehicles and other parts of infrastructure operate. So absolutely, that is part of today's design.
Great, thank you. Yes, there's, yeah, I think that's one of the benefits of the artificial intelligence is it's not just, of course, limited to the vehicles, but also to the infrastructure and the operational systems and really looking at how agencies can kind of optimize that. Mark, there's one question I had for you on the kind of from the, I know that PennDOT utilizes a lot of consultants for a lot of their activity. And what are you seeing in the consulting world from their, you know, their knowledge and experience with artificial intelligence? Is, you know, do you think this is an area that needs to, you know, to be integrating more artificial intelligence, you know, education into their workforce? I mean, or are they coming with a lot of expertise as well?
No, I mean, the blunt answer is yes, we can always use more. I think this is something that we saw early on with automation and connectivity, that there was a handful of experts and you have 50 states and then countless local municipalities all then competing over the same consultant support, since we have limited resources ourselves as public sector agencies. So any time that we can have an additional workforce that we can pull from that has the skill sets and the understanding. So it's definitely something we've seen the consulting industry really pick up and run with here. But there's still a lot that's happening and a lot that's progressing. And it's just frankly bringing in skill sets and backgrounds that you traditionally don't have. You know, a lot of the consulting firms that we worked with, you know, for the longest period of time, the way to determine if they were the appropriate individual is if they had the letters PE behind their name. That's not necessarily the case anymore. You know, this is a different dynamic here, especially from a DOT standpoint, on determining who's the right personnel to have, what's the right consultant support, and frankly, what's the right training that we should have for our own workforce. It's something that we're working through right now internally, how to make sure that we can have the skill sets and the adjustments for anyone who's in our workforce, then to bring into this whole different perspective and this whole different technology to build from.
Thank you, Mark. Allanté, I see a question in the chat that I've been seeing often in the media as well, is, you know, will autonomous vehicles create more congestion and vehicle miles traveled and therefore emissions, you know, particularly when carrying no passengers? Can you talk about some of your research in this area?
Sure. So I think that those of us who've probably been to like more than 5 like AV conversations, there's this idea of like AV heaven and hell. And the hell situation is where everyone's driving their own vehicle and they are having their vehicle drop them off at work and then drive back to their suburban home empty, which would definitely create the situation that you're talking about or the question asked. Whereas the heaven scenario definitely is looking at integrating this new technology in a shared way and deploying it in a shared way, which is why that's the emphasis of my work. Because if the vehicle is driving and dropping off someone from the suburbs to their job and then picking someone who's downtown to, you know, their job on the south side of Pittsburgh and then going back to CMU area, there's there's not going to be an increase in congestion and emissions because the vehicles are being used more efficiently. And hopefully what can also happen is with a more robust transit system, by being able to provide that first and last mile service, that usually is why people might decide to drive because of the additional trip or additional transfer or the length of the trip now being like too long for them to, it's easier to drive. We can maybe integrate, well not integrate, but reduce even car ownership. Now that part I haven't necessarily explored in my work, but we would think could be a positive externality of a result of this type of deployment.
And there's been quite a few. We're running low on time, so I'm going to try to consolidate to this last question. There's been a lot of, you know, good points brought up about transit, and we're trying to look at all artificial intelligence and not just automated vehicles. is there any examples of how transit is using artificial intelligence from maybe Mark or Allanté, from some of your experience with this to make public transit more accessible and equitable?
Yeah, I think I'll take the first crack at this. I mean, we're starting to see this, especially with things like, say, low-speed automated shuttles. There's the Linden shuttle in Columbus that went through an underserved community. So we're looking at these, going back to the concept of first last mile, especially now, transit organizations, they're in financial constraints right now with everything on top of what it had before, but with the pandemic on top of that, it's going to be difficult to continue to expand services to different areas. But if we can start to look at automation and artificial intelligence as a way that maybe we can supplement, enhance, and expand services, this is where we can start to hit to these areas where, okay, maybe we can get them back to a transit hub and go from there. So looking at low-speed automated shuttles, or frankly, even just finding efficiencies by incorporating automation into the full-size transit services. They're doing that up in Connecticut with their CT fast track system, looking at how they do platooning transit vehicles on the dedicated bus rapid transit line, and even things like just having the automation kick in for when they're coming up to the curbs, for curb spacing, to make sure that it parks appropriately to allow people on and off. You can get some efficiencies that way. And once you start to get these efficiencies, that saves money, that saves time, it opens the door for other things within those organizations. So I think you start to see a lot of transit organizations looking at this as, okay, it's a way that we can potentially supplement and enhance our services. Don't want to necessarily replace, humans with automation to do it, but it's a good way to complement each other if you do it right. And that's the important thing, is to emphasize, is to look at it up front and figure out what is the right approach.
Thank you, Mark. All right, Lisa Kay is telling me that, giving me the hook. So thank you for all of your comments. We have one more poll question. And while we run the poll question, go ahead, Lisa Kay. I'm just going to give a little bit of overview on the course coming up in May. And so we're not just going to be talking about autonomous vehicles, but also just generally, what is artificial intelligence and what is it not, more importantly? What is artificial intelligence in traffic control devices? How's it being applied, again, connected in autonomous vehicles, but also, how's it being used for predictive analytics to be able to make better decisions with the data that cities and states and organizations have now? And then artificial intelligence in asset management. So using it for just the asset management of pavement condition, sign condition, et cetera. And really looking at the equity, which we heard of a lot from Allanté today. So we will get much deeper into that. And then finally, the course will actually be, training people on how to develop and implement an enterprise AI strategy in your organization. So to Mark's point, how do you, from the beginning, how do you apply AI to actually help your organization, whether it's a public or private organization? And so those are the kind of things that this course is going to look at. And what we ask you is, if you're interested in this course, of course, please register, but also please share this with your networks. This is a very broad, I see folks coming in from industry and from research and public and private organizations and community organizations. If there's people in your organization who, it will help to have an AI expert in your organization. And, this course is intended to give someone that well-rounded knowledge and that comfort level with knowing, again, what AI is, what it isn't, what are the opportunities, and what are the risks. So please, again, feel free to come back to us with any questions and share this. And we really appreciate our speakers today, and we really appreciate all of the participants. Thank you again for joining us.